We're going to pretend that this is for the back of an adult sweater. So the back of my sweater has 100 stitches in it. And I made a gauge swatch, and my stitches are 6 stitches per inch. Now, I didn't talk about needle size for yarn and needle size for a particular number of stitches per inch, because what needle size I use to get 6 stitches per inch is probably not going to be the same needle size that you're going to use. So needle size is not really important whether I use a 4 and you use a 10. As long as you're getting 6, that's the important thing. It's 6, obviously, if that's what your pattern calls for. So we have 100 stitches in the back, on the back of our sweater, and our gauge swatch tells us that with the needles we're going to use for our project, we're getting 6 stitches per inch, and obviously the same yarn that you're going to use for your project. And that equals out for the back of our sweater to measure 16.66 inches. Now, that's just the back of our sweater. We have a front of our sweater as well. So the front of the sweater will measure 16.66 as well. That means our sweater will measure 33 1/3 inches. So we're going to write that down here. There, 33 1/3. May end up where I can't get all this on the screen. So next we're going to see how our gauge change affects our size of our sweater. So we still have 100 stitches, only now maybe we had an argument with our husband or our mother-in-law, or we've been screaming at the kids or whatever. Probably wouldn't be for 5 1/2. If we had been doing that, it would probably have gone down to a smaller gauge. But anyway, something happened. Maybe we drank a bottle of wine, I don't know. So now our gauge is actually larger. Even though the number is smaller, it means our stitches are looser. And I think I'll go back and touch on that here in a minute. So anyway, our gauge has changed to 5 1/2 stitches per inch. And now our sweater measures 18.18 inches. Just from losing a 1/2 stitch per inch, we gained 2 inches approximately. So now our sweater is going to measure 36 1/3 once we add in the front. So we're 3 inches. This sweater is 3 inches larger. 3 inches larger. That's a lot. That's a lot. Okay, the next example. Same sweater, 100 stitches across the back, 5 stitches per inch this time. Now the back measures 20 inches and the front measures 20 inches. So now we have a 40-inch sweater. And before we had a 33-inch sweater. Do your math. That's just a shy bit under 7 inches in one stitch change. We were at 6, now we're at 5. 1 stitch difference made 7 inches difference in this particular sweater. Now an adult sweater, because you're going to have more stitches, you're going to see a bigger difference. But you still will see a big difference on a baby sweater. So I've got some numbers for that. Okay, this is for a baby sweater. 60 stitches. We've got 40 stitches less. Same gauge, 6 stitches per inch. This back of this sweater will measure 10 inches. At our front end, that makes it a 20-inch sweater. And a 20-inch sweater is about a 12-month size. So now we're 20 inches, and it's about a 12-month size. We lose 1/2 stitch per inch, and our gauge has gotten looser. And now we're at 5 1/2 stitches per inch. Now it measures almost 11 inches. Well, that's 22 inches. 22 inches. A 22-inch sweater is a size 4, people. A 4. We went all the way from a 12 months to a 4. So while it may have measured differently, a lot differently for the adult size sweater, I guess because kids are so much smaller, we have a huge gap here in the size. Huge gap. And then we move on down and we have our 5 stitches per inch. We get a 12-inch back. Add in our front. That means we have a 24-inch sweater. And a 24-inch sweater is between a 6 and an 8. A size 6 and 8. While you're still carrying this baby around, this kid is often going to school. Big, big difference. Gauge is so important. I cannot stress that enough. Especially if you're making a sweater. I don't know about you. If I'm setting out to make a 12-month size sweater, and I've heard people say this, oh, it's okay. If it's too big, I'll just wait. Well, I don't know about you, but the difference between 12 months and a kid that's wearing a 6 to 8, size 6 to 8, that's a long wait. This kid's in school. And you've probably already lost the sweater. You don't even know where it's at by then. So take the time to learn how to measure gauge. And you can really utilize the knowledge and knowing how to measure gauge and utilizing the math that it takes to get that. I'm always complaining that everything I make, I always change the pattern. But what I do is I'll find a sweater that might be written for a size that's much larger than I'm looking to make because I have a new granddaughter, but I really love that sweater and I want to make it smaller. So because I know how to do the gauge and do the math, then I can make that sweater smaller and then adjust the armhole depths and what have you. Okay, so I said that I wanted to come back and go over part of the confusing part about gauge is the numbers get, I see that I'm confused at the moment. The numbers get smaller, but that means it's a larger gauge. And that always throws me off. If it throws me off, I'm sure it throws other people off. But I always try to come up with little dumb ways to remember things. And I was that way in school, you know, little sayings and what have you. Well, I don't have a cute little saying, but I'll just explain to you how I think about it. So, in our example before, we had 6 stitches per inch. And our gauge got larger to 5.5 stitches per inch. Well, when that's confusing, I stop and think, okay, in order for my gauge to be 5.5 stitches instead of 6, my stitches had to grow to push those stitches, put that half of a stitch out. That means it's going to make my sweater grow. So it's going to make it larger. And the same goes for if you were looking for a 5 and then you'd lost your gauge and down to a 6, you had to shrink your gauge to pull those stitches in and measure within this little spot. And now my sweater is shrinking as well. I don't know if that'll help you, but that's really about the best I can come up with to explain that. And, you know, if nothing else, just sit down and take those your stitch counts of, you know, at the widest point of your sweater, for example, our 100 stitches, and divide it by the stitch gauge that you were supposed to get and the stitch gauge that you're getting, and see what's going to happen to it. You know, you can look at that, you know, 16.66 number and that 18.18 number and know for sure that your sweater's growing.